Joey Gilbert, welcome to the ITA College Tennis Coaches Podcast.
Thanks, Dave. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. We've obviously known each other for quite some time, had a year at Fresno State together, which was very enjoyable. You taught me how to play golf, and I'm very appreciative of that. But lots of interesting questions. Usually we just have college coaches on this podcast, but you have such an interesting perspective, having put so many players into the college system and obviously pro players as well. But I'm sure our conversation will take us in many different ways. So like I mentioned, you've been basically spitting out players from your academy like chickens are laying eggs here over the last 10, 15 years. But you've always encouraged, from what I can tell, your very top players to go the college route, even though they probably had a lot of temptations to turn pro out of juniors. And so why have you encouraged that within your top players?
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, I'm very, very excited to talk college tennis, pro tennis, and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know if I would say I encourage them. It's interesting. The college route. I feel like there's good and bad to everything. Whatever route you choose. And so what I do with the players is we make a list of kind of the pros and cons, and we go through the list, and wherever that player is at, it doesn't matter if a kid's going pro or a kid's going D1 or D2 or D3. Like, hey, let's make a list of pros and cons of the schools, what you're looking for, what your priorities are, basically. It could be education, it could be where you want to live, it could be tennis, it could be the coach, it could be the team. What do you enjoy? And so once we make those two lists, then we look at it and go like, okay, does it fit the college route, or does it fit the pro route, or does it fit Ivy League, or does it fit the great schools out there, the top 10 schools of Ohio State and UCLA and USC and Baylor and TCU and Virginia, all these schools, that Wake Forest, that have been doing great in the the top of college tennis. So we make basically a list, pros and cons, and look at it. But our pro players, have moved to college. And I think it's a lot, especially on the boys side. So we had Katie decided not to go to college. But on the boys side, I do think the physical side is a big component, to where I don't know if they're quite physically ready for the tour. And that's tough on the men's side by 17, 18 to be quite physically ready for the tour. So definitely college helps them, give them a little bit of time. And I think college also became a lot more open-minded over the last 5 to 6 years, especially when Colin won Kalamazoo in 2013, and then Jensen won Kalamazoo in 2018. I felt there was a huge difference between those 5 years of, hey, he can go for 1 to 2 years and then turn pro. Like, that was a very big, way more colleges were open-minded to it. Way more were setting it up for that, kind of like the basketball 1 and done or 2 and done, and way more open to those discussions, which if you look at a lot of the guys in the top 100 in the world that went to college, most of them are in those 1 to 2 years and then going pro. So I think that avenue was huge for college tennis, to make it a little bit more of a hybrid, have them play pro tournaments during it. And I think once the coaches became open-minded to that, I feel like that hybrid started moving players into the top 100 in the world a lot better than it was before that.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, you've sat on the other side of the table with players and parents, speaking with coaches as they've been recruiting your players. I'm sure you've had countless phone calls through the years of as coaches have tried to convince you as to why they should send player X or Y to their university and not somewhere else. And so what mistakes do you see coaches make during the recruiting process, or have you seen them make through the years?
Yeah, I mean, one, the recruiting process, I'm not jealous of it. It's a brutal task. You're selling, you're selling the school, you're selling yourself, you're selling, the program, I love college tennis, and I feel like one of the things that I never went that route as a coach because I wouldn't like the recruiting process of selling so much. So I know that's a difficult task. Um, I would say the hardest thing or what I've seen the mistake is just, to be honest about everything. This will be a funny one, I think, is how many times, Dave, you tell me, even in our recruiting process, and going, how many times, did you hear, like, okay, there's going to be a new stadium, there's going to be a new this, or there's going to be a new that with the facilities, and then it doesn't really happen, right? Like there's one university here that it's I won't name any names, but it recruited one of our players like 10 years ago. It said they'd have a new stadium, and then they just recruited one of our players this year 10 years later, and they said they would have a new stadium. And it's like, the kids aren't going there for I mean, maybe some kids are, but they're not. And that's the thing, is they're selling facilities, they're selling, the brand a lot. And I do think that has some value, but that doesn't keep the kids there. I think tennis, I heard this, and I could be wrong, that tennis has the #1 transfer rate of any sport. And I think that's very much because the recruiting process is based off the wrong things, right? It's based off facility, it's based off gyms, it's based off of like the beauty of the campus where you're living, instead of making that pros and cons list and going, okay, what am I going to this school for? And then getting probably to know the kid and the coaches, and that kind of process is, they need to spend way more time on it than they do. They spend more time on the brand and the facility, and what, how beautiful the place is and the social side of it, rather than, hey, like, I'm going to spend X amount of time with this team and with the coaches and with my traveling with them and all that kind of stuff. It's like, really get to know what you're signing up for and what you're dealing with on a day to day in basis, 4 hours a day, the grind of it. And so getting to know the philosophy of the coaches, the practice schedules, the times, how they see the courts, how it works, especially coming from how you've been training your whole life, getting into the I don't know, the little details, I feel like everyone kind of lacks.
Yes. So you're saying, is that on both sides, both the prospective student athlete and the coach? So the coach is maybe selling the wrong thing. They're focusing too much on the facilities, on the campus life, where they should be focusing more on expressing their coaching philosophy, getting into the weeds, letting these players know what the day to day actually looks like, and what their
100%.
expectations are.
Yeah, the coaches, look, if a player is going to come, I mean, it's very similar how they come to our academy, right? They're coming because of the brand or the name. Like, we've created so many players, we've done really, we've had so much success, so they walk in, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the same thing as all these big universities. I mean, they've whether they've won championships or they have that brand, like, this player is coming to them, right? So the player is pretty much a blank slate, and I can't blame them for not always asking the right questions, right? Like,
Mhm.
they're just kids, and parents are just um,
Parents.
yeah, parents, right? They don't know exactly on the tennis side what they're looking for. Parents know on the education side, what they're looking for, on the school side, on the life side, they're unbelievable with their kids. But on the tennis side, that's what's kind of hidden, and I don't feel like it gets very in depth. And the recruiting process is very difficult. It's they're limited in time, they're limited in what they're getting with that kid. So a lot of the times they're just showing off the program and the locker rooms and everything, rather than sitting down and going like, hey, having 3 or 4 hour discussions with them on tennis, right? And looking at video and going, listen, this is how you play. This is what we believe you need to work on. This is what we're going to be doing in the years to come. I mean, this is the one I find that the funniest with our kids going to college is they all come back and yeah, I go, okay, what do you do in practices sometimes? And they're like, well, I think there was 3 or 4 players said this to me. They're like, the first time they went to college and they got to decide what they did in practice, and they didn't even know what to say. Like college coaches were like, well, what do you want to do today? And my players are like, well, we've never been asked that. So like, because I run, I'm not asking a player most of the time what they want to do. I don't think I've ever asked them. I just kind of like, hey, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to work on. I'm the coach. I'm supposed to know this. It's my job. And so this is what we're doing. I'll ask them how they're feeling, or ask them some questions, what they think of this or think of that, but I'm putting the structure together. And so a lot of the times it's getting into those type of things. Even, I probably 10 kids we've sent that have come back and like, well, these coaches want me to play a very different way than what I've been training. And I was like, well, that would have been nice to hear ahead of time, right? And then you get these transfers because of this. And I would say we've sent at least 30 to 40 kids to college, and I would say we probably have 5 to 10 of them that transferred. And so there you go. That's a percentage pool, and I definitely think the high rate of transfer is due to not getting into the details during the recruiting process.
Okay. And so if I'm a coach calling you and there's a player that I'm recruiting that you've been working with for several years, how would I convince you that I am the best coach for this player? What is it you need to hear from me to convince you to put in a good word for me with this player?
Well, I think the more I looked at it, the more I look at open-mindedness. Like every kid is coming from these academies or coming from a place, whether it's coaches, parents, a situation, kind of what you and I were talking about before, is there's all different dynamics with each place that is developing a player and different philosophies. So you're going to have to put the time in to learn it. And you don't have to learn every detail. That's going to take you way too long. It's more just getting a general idea of their day-to-day before they come out. So I mean, it's funny. I'm in California, in Sacramento, and surrounded by colleges everywhere in California, and I'd probably say 2 college coaches. California college coaches, maybe 2 to 3 have been to our academy. It's in for producing so many players, like coming to see the day-to-day operation and see how they're training and see the style and see the philosophy. I mean, I think that's what I'm kind of saying is we're spending so much time on selling this visual rather than getting into what this kid's days and their day is, especially at our academy, so different than what the college day is. It's crazy. We've had multiple kids come back and like, hey, they don't play a lot of tennis. and a lot of hours. They want more hours because we train more hours than 20 hours a week
Right.
on the courts, right? And they're limited on how many hours they can train. And then, the school process and the social life and all that kind of stuff. So our kids feel like, man, I'm not playing near as much tennis. So then that gives them anxiety a bit, like, hey, I'm not training as hard as I used to, which also hits their confidence right away. And so it just breaks down right from there in the first couple of weeks, right? Like they panic. So I think if I was a college coach, I would definitely make more home visits. I feel like there's some schools out there, funny enough, we've probably had more schools from outside of California come to our facility than schools inside California, which always shows me which coaches are trying the hardest, right? They're trying to get these kids, and they're trying to learn about the kids and get to know them personally, meet with the parents, watch them for a day, right? And I know that's hard. They could be recruiting, I don't know, I'm not a college coach, but they could be recruiting 10 kids, I don't know. And so if you got to spend 2 weeks, watching kids days, but I definitely think that leg work you're putting in there is going to save you leg work.
Sure.
You've been a college coach. How many meetings do you go through with those kids? Kind of backtracking maybe on learning about their past rather than figuring out. And then you might find in that recruiting process that kid's not the right fit, and it'll save you time on that side.
Well, yeah, you talked a little bit about players going, maybe not recognizing some of those differences between their junior days and their college days, but how can coaches help that transition? So again, if I'm a player and I've just signed with a university to start, say, next August or September, what can that coach maybe be doing between now and when I get there in September? And also when I do arrive on campus, what can the coach do to facilitate a smoother transition so I feel good about what I'm about to get into, and it's not as daunting as maybe it could be?
Yeah, well, definitely that time period of when a kid signs and when a kid gets there is, to me, the most dangerous period, like of what goes on, because I do feel like sometimes communication dies down once a kid signs, right? Because they locked it in to an extent. And then also the kid's sense of urgency dies down because he's locked in, the thing.
Yeah.
So intensity just drops, right? So I would say to both player and coach, like, keep doing what you were doing in the recruiting process with the kid all the way through to what he gets there. So that's one side of it. Like, keep up the same, like, judge yourself off of that. Am I calling this kid the same amount? Am I watching him the same amount? Am I doing the details the same amount as I was doing when I was recruiting him? So that's one side I would do. And then the other side is, if I recruited a kid and he's locked in, I would start putting a program together for him immediately, and start learning about his current program, and then trying to adapt a program. I would have a wild adventure if I was on the college coaching side. So I think it would be very interesting if a college coach set it up this way, and some have moved this way more and more. Is like, a lot of colleges have 3 coaches, and I'm like, all right, you put 9 guys on a team, that's 1 coach per 3 players, which is pretty small.
At the top of Division I, yeah.
Yes, at the top of Division I. I know this is more difficult down below, but then I would start setting these kids up and training them a little bit more individually that way, right? So now, if I'm one coach and I've got 3 players, I've got 60 hours with those, you know what I mean? With each one, I got 60 hours. I can train them all individually. So I do think like in our days of, Fresno State, right, doing a two coaches, 12 player practice for 2 to 3 hours. I don't see that as a way of developing players consistently coming out. There's going to be the top of if you do it that way, the top players, the guys playing one or two are going to get the most attention. Bottom line, it's very difficult and I'm not blaming, the coaches for that. It's just, this is how the model works. And so if you start separating it and going, okay, I'm one coach, 3 players, and I can start doing 2-on-1s, and I can start doing 1-on-1s, and I can start doing individual lessons more. I mean, our kids in our academy, when you sign up for our academy, and I've seen these posts too, I find it very interesting. We ask for 3 to 5 private lessons a week, and so that's a huge amount of private lessons from a young age, right? So if you take Colin or take Jensen or take Katie or take Austin Wang and all these other players, Eric Haddigan, that we've developed from a young age, we're developing them with 3 to 5 private lessons a week. And so that's a ton of individual time one-on-one, right? And so to go from that to what some college tends to is like once every 2 to 3 weeks, it's going to be a recipe for disaster. And so that's right away what I tell my players to do is like, hey, ask them how much individual time you get, right? Because this academy is based off of so much individual time. Like, what are you getting that? So if I was a college coach and I just recruited a kid, I'd go learn about their day-to-day schedule. And then how am I going to not do it the exact same, but give a feeling of that, so the kid doesn't feel like his world just got turned upside down, because his world on everything else is getting turned upside down, right? His world on doing his own laundry right now and showing up on time on his own. He doesn't have his parents' help, eating correctly, with all the food they have at colleges, all this kind of stuff. So if their whole world is getting turned upside down outside of tennis, keeping tennis, intact as much as possible, that was similar through their last 5 or 6 years, I think is the route I would go.
Yeah, no, I think that's sound advice, and for the programs that have the ability to do that, and it might be a transition, as you said, like it might be, okay, how do I mimic as much as what they were doing leading in, and then over their freshman into their sophomore year, maybe you start making some tweaks as they adapt. And so I think that's great. Well, Joey, you mentioned Jensen Brooksby. I think you coached him from probably the age of 8 or so, I believe. And
yes, I started with him at 7 years old.
7 years old. And so I think a lot of people would argue that you and he squeezed every bit of ounce of ability out of him. I think he's reached a career high of 33 on the ATP tour. He's not a player you expect when you watch him to be 33 in the world. No offense. I mean, it's amazing, what he's done, but you can see some of the limitations there. But he's maximized every part of his ability, his athletic ability, shall we say. How do you go about helping a player with limited athletic ability reach their potential? Because every coach is looking for that great athlete.
Yeah.
It's the first thing, oh, he or she's a great athlete. And any coach who's worked with a great athlete knows, there's a lot you can do with that player. And their ceiling's a little bit higher. But then there's every so often you see a player who has limitations, but has other intangibles that you like. And maybe a coach doesn't focus on those intangibles enough and is too fixated on the athletic ability side of things. So how would you go about that process? I've now got a player who is a hard worker, competes well, but is limited athletically, how am I going to get this player to win a ton of matches for my program?
Yeah, great question. It's a long answer. It was funny when you go up to the highest level. I mean, the athletes up there are just amazing.
Really? Yeah.
It's elite, and it's it's the best. You take an Alcaraz, and it's just athleticism and a Sissipas. It's like, man, and for Jensen to compete on that side athletically is it was our biggest question mark. When we were developing going that direction. I mean, love Jensen to death, but athletically, he he's bad, and he was bad all the way through his career too. And we would joke about it and we would laugh about it all the time. So I have no problem talking about it. I mean, I think, and that when commentators say he's so fast or he covers the court quick, I mean, we all laugh. It's he doesn't win the sprints against our 16 to 17-year-olds out here at the academy, even at 21. He doesn't win the push-ups. He doesn't win the pull-ups. He doesn't win anything athletically, physically. He doesn't win. And so, but that was never and interesting. It never attracted me, and I never understood. And maybe I understand a little bit more now, getting to the top of the game. You go to these tournaments, and I even went with my daughter the other day, and everybody's like, "Look how tall that kid is," or "Look how big that kid is," or like they ask like what their how tall their parents are. I was like, "What is this, a height contest?" I'm like, "What am I doing here?" I was like, I mean, everybody, and I'm just like. And even my daughter, her first tournament, she's like, "That girl's tall, that girl's tall." I was like, what are we talking about here? Like, that forehand's terrible. I would like to talk about that. But all we're talking about, I mean, she can't rally to three, but she's tall. So it's very much, when it comes to athleticism, a visual that looks amazing. And it's not concrete, and it's not I look at players out there and I see some of the best athletes in the world, and I see holes in their game, and then I see some of the lower athletes that have less holes in their game. And so a big part to what we do, and I do feel that, I don't care if it's from the government body of countries or from college coaches or from the private sector, across the board, we search for the best athletes, which I understand why. But tennis, at the end of the day, is it's a skilled sport, and it's closer to golf than it is, say, football and basketball, where athleticism is so high, right? And so where no matter what, I'm not going to be a center in the NBA. Like, that's out the door. And so it doesn't matter what I do skill wise, it's never going to happen. Whereas on the tennis court, it's closer to golf. Like, okay, you can put Michael Jordan on the tennis court against you and I, Dave, and we're going to be just fine. We're going to make him look like he doesn't know how to move, and all of these type of things, because tennis is a skilled sport. So when I looked at Jensen or even a lot of our kids, because we're based in Sacramento and we don't have the biggest metropolis or the most athletes coming through the door. I gave up on looking for that. If I was waiting for Monfils to walk through the door, I think I'd be waiting for a really long time.
Right.
So you do the best with the hand you're dealt, but I learned you can still win. And I felt like two big things that separated it was the culture and the philosophy. And those are the two biggest things that I found. If you give a player from a young age good culture and a good philosophy on how to win, then that kid can take that and get to the highest levels. And I really believe that if they're determined enough, focused enough, hard enough working, some intangibles come in. They got to have something to it, but most kids do have something. I mean, Jensen's the best example. Okay, he's not fast, he's not big, he's not strong, he doesn't hit the biggest ball, doesn't have a big serve. Like I brought coaches in here. I was like, okay, he doesn't have anything that everybody says you need to win. Right? Does he have a huge forehand? No. Does he have a big serve? No. Is he super fast? No. Is he strong? No. Is he, so how is he win? And he won, I think, when he qualified for the U.S. Open and then beat Berdych and then was ahead in the second round, and he was only about, I think, 18. Okay, how is he winning, right? And so then that comes to the philosophy, and then if you give a philosophy that a player believes in and they can execute and they're super focused on that, then I believe they can get to the highest levels that way.
And so is that philosophy, does that change from player to player based on their limitations or athletic ability or strengths or weaknesses? Or do you have a philosophy that you're applying? That you talked about culture, I assume that culture is in place for every player, but is the player development philosophy the same for every player?
So it is, interestingly enough. I mean, it morphs depending on their athleticism and depending on where their strengths are. But interestingly enough, whether it was Katie, whether it was Colin, whether it was Jensen, whether it's Aiden Mayo, who we work with now, and whatever player it is, and we worked with a bunch of good players, Govin, and we set up the same philosophy. And then what happens is their intangibles move them to a certain spot. And so, for instance, right? So, and I don't mind sharing the philosophy. It's very different than the regular philosophy. And you've heard these philosophies: serve +1, taking away time. Players looking to play very aggressive, and I'm not against those things, building weapons, all that kind of stuff. Our philosophy is a little different. And so what we base it off of is, to me, and especially I watched a lot of videos on Djokovic and on Nadal and on Federer because they've been dominating the game for so long. I started teaching aggressiveness is whoever can make the other guy run more. And it was a real simple philosophy of we're going to play this game left to right rather than forward and back, because I started believing that taking away time was very difficult against Nadal standing 90 feet behind the court, right? Like, how do you take away time? This guy is, so far back, he can run everything down. Like, how do you take away time against that guy, right? And everybody was giving him a hard time when he first came out. Like, he's playing too far back, he's playing too far back. And now I look at Medvedev and Zverev standing 20, 30 feet back on Jensen Brooksby serve, which is comical, right? Okay, like the kid's serving 115 and these guys are on the back fence. So instead of saying, why are nobody's going, they're just saying, well, that's wrong. Well, maybe it's not. Right? Like, what are they doing? Why are they doing this? What look is they're giving them, right? Like, I never have Jensen stand that far back. And there is a difference of why I believe, like, guys that stand that far back have to be some of the most physical, athletic guys. Alcaraz can be that far back. Nadal can be that far back. You watch the clay court players can be that far back. They have to be the biggest, strongest athletes to be that far back. That's why with the Jensen, I was like, hey man, we're never going that far back. We go that far back, this is done. And so that was, whereas when I trained Colin could go that far back because he enjoyed the physical more. He enjoyed the grind of it in the clay court a little bit more, and the more heavy topspin and high balls. And so we based our philosophy off of playing more left to right, making the guy run more change of directions, more angles, more drop shots, more spins, which then leads into, hey, a player like more skill, right? A little bit more like all these shots in golf. Like you can have a big guy that can hit a long drive,
Mm.
but if he doesn't have a flop shot and he doesn't have the putting and he doesn't have the chips and he doesn't have the sand and he did, and so then it was more based off of that. And if you watch our players play, a lot of redirects down the line, a lot of drop shots, a lot of switching directions, a lot of hitting deep, hitting targets, and running the person around left to right. And if you win that game, I believe then you're playing a different game than the other guy, and then that gives you the advantage. And it was interesting to me watching people comment on Jensen at the highest level. They would say stuff like, "Well, he competes really hard." I was like, "Well, I can compete really hard. I'm not going to win. like I'm a great competitor, but I'm not going to win, right?" Or he's consistent. I actually felt like a lot of matches he wasn't very consistent. He was making errors a ton, but I believe when he was playing the strategy and he was playing the philosophy against guys who are doing the opposite, right? When the guys are looking to finish the point, hit through them, do a serve +1. Well, what if you don't let them do that, right?
Mm.
Then what style of game you got to play? And so, yeah, I watched it, lots of video with Djokovic playing Nadal, and I watched it and I was like, Djokovic is running him, right? Right. Real simple. If two guys are on top of the baseline, one steps 3 steps forward, the other one steps 3 steps back, you're still the same distance.
Mm.
You didn't take away time.
Right.
Right? Like the distance equals time.
Mm-hmm.
So if he takes 3 more steps, you take 3 more. You didn't take away time. What you did was you opened the court, and now there's so much more space. So
Mm.
now hitting hard and hitting through them isn't going to run him that much. Hitting all the angles, hitting the drops, and that kind of stuff. So if you really start watching, and that's what, to me, Fed, Nadal, and Djokovic were so far ahead of the game on doing those type of things. I mean, Fed, everybody comments about him coming in, and I do agree with that. But at 5-all deuce, I thought Nadal and Fed were the two greatest passing shot players ever to live. Fed would draw people in like crazy with his short slice. And
Mm.
now that's a modern day play, right? Like you draw them in, you hit a curving slice off the court, brings them in, and then they hit the pass. Like that changed the game. Like that went from, in the 90s where it's like you didn't want people coming in to now they're daring you to come in, right?
Mm.
And so then understanding, well, that slice is moving this way. It's now moving this way. So then trying to come to the net while you're running to the side is very difficult. Then it opens up the other side. So now they're playing a left to right game. And I feel like, I don't know, I don't feel like this is explained that well, and from what I see it. And I feel like there's different philosophies and that throughout tennis. And I feel like, Jensen and our players have been able to take this philosophy and run with it, and it's been very successful on a all the way to the highest of the levels, and then also even to get them to college and to do this, it's been pretty successful through it. If Jensen's match at the Australian Open against Casper, he was able to get the offense a ton and kind of control that match by moving it left to right on a regular basis. And I guarantee if I stat that match, I'm thinking Casper ran more than Jensen,
Mm.
even though Jensen was probably more tired. So
Yeah.
that kind of showed the athleticism, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Jensen's standing in the middle running Casper left to right, and Jensen's the tired one. And so then I'm sitting there going, okay, we need to get in the gym more. We need to build the physical point to compete at that level, and to dominate at that level. But the philosophy was there.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that, Joey. That's fascinating. Have you seen, have you tracked any movement statistics and, seen over time that the player who runs the most loses the most? Have you seen anything like that, or is it more just you watching and observing and just recognizing? You recognize who's kind of maybe not dictating play, but I guess dictating play. They're moving the other player, so they
Right,
are.
it's just a different way of being aggressive, right? And
Mhm.
I think so. So the nice part about getting up to the highest part of the games is now the resources are there. That's the one thing that, I would say in the private sector compared to college and compared to pro, we lack the resources 100%.
Right.
The USDA has tons of resources. The college has tons of resources, and that's where I would invest more of my resources into is getting the top of the game is going very data driven. It
Yeah.
was shocking to me when we got to the top of the game and all the data guys were all over Jensen because they could just see he was a data. It was like the perfect guy for
Mm.
data, right? Like he's not Kyrgios where he's just hitting 140 and cracking winners and he's making this game look so easy. He's playing a percentage game, right?
Mm.
So they came to us and they're like, okay, we want to do data with Jensen. And when I started looking at the data and I started shooting it out to them, they were surprised how accurate I was on his data. But I've been with the kid for 14 years. So I
Yeah.
was like, listen, if I don't know this stuff, I'm not really paying attention. I go, so I haven't gotten to do much data, and I am interested in that now, doing data on a larger scale of tennis, right? And that would have to be with an association or with somebody that has the resources to do it.
Sure.
But when I sat down and I did Jensen's data, especially when he made that run at the US Open, I had all the Hawkeye information and they could do steps. And I asked him straight, like they're like, what stat do you want to know? And I asked him dead straight, like first questions like, did he take more steps or did they take more steps, right?
Mm.
In when they were competing, and it was an interesting answer because he went round to 16 that year, and that was the year he played Djokovic and lost, but he had a good match with him. And from first round all the way to around to 16, every set, and this was the cool thing about the data analysis, every set, his opponent ran more than he did.
Wow.
And so, and even those sets he lost, his opponent ran more than he did, even Djokovic. And
Wow.
yeah, but Djokovic was the closest margin, which I
Mm.
found that even more interesting, right? Like, so Djokovic was to an extent playing a similar game
Mhm.
because Djokovic doesn't have the biggest serve, doesn't have the biggest forehand, doesn't have the biggest backhand, doesn't like
Sure.
he just does, like it's up there, but it's not. There's no shot that we're going, this is the biggest weapon. And for so long, America, especially America, was into that, right? Like we want to build weapons, we want to build
Mm.
weapons, but they they had some of the biggest weapons, but they also had some of the biggest weaknesses.
Right.
So that didn't make for 3 out of 5 sets over 2 weeks. Like it's
Yeah.
risky, right? Tennis is a percentage game over time, and I feel like I definitely feel like Djokovic knows that. I definitely feel like a Medvedev, right? A Medvedev is the same thing. He doesn't look like the biggest athlete out there, but he's skilled. He's
Mm-hmm.
playing a percentage game, and he's working the points and he's setting it up. So it's interesting, that dynamic. So yeah, I would be extremely interested in diving into that on a larger scale, not just
Mhm.
Jensen, right? And starting to look at that.
So with that, again, bringing it back to the college space. So let's say I'm a college coach, bringing in an 18-year-old player. you know, they have a nice game, they do everything pretty decently. How might I get them, or how might I start working on this philosophy with them? Am I trying to develop their skill set so they can hit a nice slice, they can drop shot, they have decent feel, they can hit higher balls, etc.? Or am I focusing more on, you know, the targets and getting them to switch those targets more consistently, not get drawn into maybe longer patterns of play, or is it a little bit of everything? How would you say in the first 6 months working with a player get them to
Well,
start applying this?
well, one, I feel like for the most part, kids are pretty skilled unless they have a flaw in their technique, right? You look at the
Mm-hmm.
technique, and if there's a flaw, then you could be in trouble there. I definitely felt on the pro tour, even at the highest level with some of the best athletes, I felt like there are certain shots they couldn't hit, and I was actually stunned. I would watch video and I would be like, all right, Jensen, like I want you to hit this shot in this spot, and I don't believe this guy can do this shot. And because his technique won't allow him, this shot won't allow him. But it's building in targets is 100%. So even when we were at Fresno, right, there was like for better or for worse, there was a philosophy of grinding, right? Like it's just going to be a grind. And so whether we're doing figure eights or whether we're doing that, this is what it is. I would have liked to know that myself before I went there. so then maybe I would have thought twice about it, but because I wasn't looking for the grind at that point in my career. But at least I would know, right? So as a college, I would definitely have a philosophy of like, what do you believe in here? Right? As an academy, we have that philosophy. Like you're coming in, you're going to learn this. You're going to learn this philosophy, right? And if you don't want to, it's okay. Like I don't mind. If you do, let's go and let's get to work. And then once you get to work, it is about like, all right, I put up targets, I start feeding them balls, and I see what they can and can't do. Right? There's certain shots that I know Jensen doesn't like to hit. Colin doesn't like to hit. Katie doesn't like to hit. And then there's certain shots I know they love to hit. So then day in and day out, we're going and we're drilling the things they don't like to do. And then we're letting them play points on the things they like to do. And so then it's spreading it out, right? You know, I'll just point out when, you know, Jensen likes his little slice drop shot backhand, right? That goes that way. He enjoys that probably more than hitting a big forehand winner. It's you know, whatever. It's weird. It's him. It's what he likes. So then, okay, what are we going to drill? Like certain spots, certain shots that he doesn't like to hit, right? And then you get them confidence in hitting those shots, and then it starts opening up the court. So when we're at home on the courts, we're teaching them all the different shots to hit. Then once we go to the matches, we're saying, okay, this is how I want you to break down this guy. And it's an interesting shift because at home they're all kind of frustrated because we're picking on their weaknesses. Like, and so then they're everyone's a little edgy, everyone's a little in a bad mood, like to an extent, because you're working on your weaknesses all the time to get them stronger. And then once you shift it to tournaments, you start going, okay, this is the other guy's weakness, this is how I'm going to break it down. And then our players enjoy that, right? Like, okay, now I get to move and I get to break down these other guys of what they can and can't do. And then, you know, it becomes fun. I don't know if I could teach a person just saying like, hey, you're the biggest athlete, I want you to hit the biggest serve, hit the biggest ball, stand on top of the baseline, and let's I don't feel there's a lot of thought in that. And so then for me, that would be boring. And so for me, I enjoy the tactical side, the strategical side, the data analysis side of, hey, how are we going to win this? And if you look at tennis, the best athletes are not, they're not dominating the sport. That tells you that there's more here than just being a great athlete.
Yeah, no, there's so much there to consider, Joey. Again, so appreciate you sharing that with our coaches. I think they'll find this very interesting and start thinking about it in some different ways, and also getting this next generation of well, coaches and players, and I guess parents as well. I mean, I even remember when I was living back in Ireland and I started playing a lot of tennis, and I'm playing in these open tournaments and I'm chopping up the junior players, and they're all like he doesn't really do anything,
Right.
and they're not really putting it together. It's like, yeah, I just beat you 6-1 6-1 without hitting a winner,
Yep.
like, and you want to say I'm not very good, and I'm an old man, all the rest of it, but it's like there's no self-reflection there. Like, okay, this guy just beat me 6-1 6-1, he hardly hit a winner, but instead of me focusing on reflecting on that and
Right.
questioning it, and same with coaches and parents, like, they'll mark it down to a bad day. Well, that guy wasn't very good, you just had a terrible day.
Right.
Understanding, like, no, I'm just picking you apart slowly, and I'm not making any mistakes, or making very few mistakes. I'm not, like I said, hitting any winners, but I'm moving you around. I'm figuring out what your weaknesses are, and I'm going to make you pay for those weaknesses, kind of thing. And I don't, so it's great that we're having this conversation, and hopefully more conversations will happen and more coaches will stop focusing on, okay, who is the kid with the biggest forehand, kind of thing, or this discussion that it's weapons only, and start moving into, look at Djokovic, greatest player of all
Right.
time, what's this guy doing, let me maybe mimic that a little
Strategically.
more.
Right. And I feel like every level, whether any sport, like strategically, you're looking at, you can look at basketball and Steph Curry and these guys, they changed the game, right? Like shooting differently, spreading it out differently, every making 3-pointers, like, okay, that revolutionized the game. It changed the game for
Mm-hmm.
better or for worse. It changed the game. And so it was always so funny to me. Jensen was the funniest because he was the least athletic. He's probably the least athletic that's ever been in the top 100. And so each level, it was like junior tennis, it would never work in the 16s and 18s. 16s and 18s, it would never work in college. As soon as it gets college, okay, it'll never work at the pros. Okay, he'll never get the top 100. Okay, he'll never get the top 50. And it was the same people saying this every single time.
Mm.
And I'm just like, there is no self-reflection here. Even to this day, he beats the guy number 3 in the world. Beats number 3 in the world. There's no self-reflection going, okay, how is he doing this? Right? Like not, it's just he doesn't have a serve. Like it's just all I hear is he doesn't have a serve. He doesn't have a serve. He doesn't have a serve. I was like, okay, I agree he doesn't have a serve. Like it's not a huge serve. Well, have you gotten to know the kid? I mean, he has very low upper body strength his whole life. He hasn't been able to throw a football longer than 20 yards. Still can't throw a tennis ball over the fence. Get to know the kid. Why? But then don't just look at that. Look at, okay, we've got a guy that's probably the least athletic out here, beating a guy top 5 in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How is he doing? And it's so weird to me. Nobody comes up and goes, how is he doing?
Mm.
Everybody just goes, well, his serve's not very big. And I'm just scratching my head going like that's what you're picking up from watching this.
Mm. Yeah.
Serve's not big. I was like, yeah, I mean, I think I can get anyone to say a serve's not big. Like anybody can walk around. It's just
Right.
radar, right? The serve's not big, but how is he winning these matches? And so, and I do believe if a really big athlete, physical athlete, took on the same philosophy, then it does turn into Djokovic. It does turn into Nadal. It does turn into those things.
Right.
I believe this is the way those guys have been playing, and I believe by taking less athletic players on a regular basis to whether it's D1 college tennis consistently, whether it's national championships consistently, whether it's pro tour consistently, I believe that this philosophy, it works. It works.
Mm.
And so I do think if college coaches were a little bit more, and college coaches, pro coaches, private sector coaches, all of us just being more open-minded to like, okay, there are different ways to play this game and different philosophies, then you do get something like, as simple as Steph Curry taking 3 steps back and going, well, why can't I shoot? Why do I have to shoot from the 3-point line? Why can't I shoot a little further back? And then it spreads the court so far, right? And now it opens up everything for my teammates. And now guys have to come further out and cover me. And now it spreads the court even more. And then everybody's running with this philosophy now. So it's just interesting to me. But definitely you can, it took me a lot of years took me 10 years to kind of feel really comfortable mastering it and doing it over and over and over and over again. But I definitely think that style and that philosophy can be learned and can be done consistently.
Yeah, well, you've obviously done it consistently and replicated it many times, and I think you've probably produced more top players out of your academy than a lot of I don't say small countries, small and big countries would be thrilled to have that, player after player, year after year, play at those levels. I know my home country of Ireland would be thrilled with that. So, but there's many others out there. So. Joe, you've been around all these tournaments at every level, right? From under 12s, basic USTA tournaments all the way to US Open, Wimbledon, etc. You've also built, a great business out there in Sacramento. You have your system in place. You're a self-made man, basically. And so, what lessons have you maybe learned along the way that our coaches can adopt either on or off the court, that will help their players' programs be the best they can be?
Yeah, look, I definitely think investing in systems and time with the player, putting the hours on court. I feel like building the culture. All of these things, get in your bubble and just work, work. And you can learn like all of these things. So it's funny is a good example. I think Jose Aguirre came to our academy a long time ago when Colin was doing well. And we had a couple other kids doing well. And he's like, I think throughout the academy, it's like, these are some of the best backhands in the country. And that was at the time that America was struggling with the backhand a bit, and he looked at that and said that, and I was like, well, what's funny is I had a terrible backhand, in growing up, and I threw out everything I learned when I started looking at the backhand, and I just started from scratch, right? Just a blank slate in my head, and I started feeding balls and started looking at what I liked in a backhand and what I wanted it to do, instead of following the same thing I was taught. When I hear coaches go, well, I was taught this way, I was taught this way, I was like, the game changes and the game revolutionizes, and so it's the same thing with the college coaching, right? Like if you're doing that 2 to 3 hour group practice with 2 coaches, like try to change something. The game is changing, the times are changing, things are evolving, and that's what I try to pride myself on is whether it's a business, whether it's technique, whether it's strategy, whether it's like everything's going to keep evolving, and you can see that with technology and different businesses. You can see that with whether it's Apple or Amazon or all these other companies. Like tennis is the same thing, and so if you can evolve with it, I mean, I would have this would be a whole different podcast, but so many ideas with what tennis could do to be more entertaining, right? And fun, and sell it to the fans better, and that would be that one I would have a blast talking about, because there's just, but we're so limited in our minds of changing what we've done in the past. And I think tennis is the worst at that. One of the worst sports when it comes to um, always just, it's just about, well, it's always been done that way.
Mhm.
It's tradition. And I'm like, well, tradition is not always good. Like there's good parts to tradition and bad parts to tradition, and we've learned that through history. so
Mhm.
so like maybe making some changes it could be good for the sport, and it would grow our sport, and it would be more entertaining, and more people would watch, and it would be more fun. So I definitely think having these conversations, and I'm looking forward to having more of them to see if we can brainstorm outside the box a little bit. And I think
Mhm.
college coaches get
Yeah.
stuck doing the same thing year after year. I think academies get stuck doing the same thing year after year. I think all parts of the tennis model get stuck, instead of going, okay, let's sit back and go, really, is this what's working and what's best? And so
Right.
that would be my if you have a bunch of kids transferring from your school, like sit back and go, okay, what can I do differently
Mhm.
to do it? And like you said, self-reflect. Don't blame, if a kid isn't doing well with us, I never blame the kid.
Mhm.
I blame the team. The kid's part of the team, but I blame the team. I sit down with the parents, I sit down with the kid, I sit with myself and be like, all right, this isn't working. And how do we move this the right direction? What pieces do we have to move? So I try not to point fingers, and I just try to look at whether it's our business, whether it's our coaches, whether it's our academy, whether it's our parents, whether it's our players. How do we do it that's the culture. How do we do this as a team to move it a better direction? And then for me, it's fun to come to work that way. And it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like work. Time goes fast, and it's fun, and I enjoy it.
Good. Good. Yeah. No, it definitely. We should do a round two. I'd love to get into more of those things with you. I do have a theory that because of the popularity of tennis kind of in the 70s, 80s, that everybody kind of sat back and assumed that tennis would be fine, that it would stand the test of time. It would always be popular. There wouldn't be these other sports that come up that are capturing the imagination of next generations. I mean, when I was a kid in Ireland, right, there was probably 4 or 5 sports that I could play, maybe a few more in America with football and basketball, but now you've got everything under the sun. You've got virtual sports, you've got BMX, you've got X gaming, you've got skiing, mountain biking. I mean, all these things now
UFC,
have
UFC's huge. Pickleball's huge.
pickleball. You've got all these challenges, and like you said, I think that's one of the struggles for the tennis industry as a whole, and college tennis is no different. Just a reluctance to change, and as you talk about the just the things that we've had in place for all these times, the traditions, not all of them are good, and not all of them are healthy for our game. So but let's do a round two on that some other time, Joey.
I'd
Let's
love to do that. That would be
Yeah.
fun. That one piques my interest an extreme amount, because we love this game, right? You love it, I love
Oh
it.
my God, yeah, we're dedicating our lives to it, so
Yeah, we
it's
want to see it. My daughter's in it. I want to see it. I only want to see good things come from it. So I feel like and I do feel like more conversations on that, rather than going like, I always see the comments like, well, that's the rules, that's the rules, that's the rules. Well, is it a good rule? Right, like just stop for a second and go, does this rule make sense, right?
yeah.
And then dive into that, right, rather than just constantly blindingly going, well, that's the rules, you got to follow the rules. And that's what I feel like tennis does 24/7, is just,
Mm,
that's the rule, got to follow the rules. And I was like, well, I agree, follow the rules. I'm not saying don't follow the rules, but I'm saying, well, can we have a conversation
yeah.
to say like, is this rule good, right? Is it good for tennis for the long haul? Does it
Hmm.
make sense? Can we hear different opinions? Can we have debates without it being arguments or fights or unhealthy or two players doing it over Twitter? Like, I don't know if that's the healthiest way to go about it, right? Like, how about we do it in a way that can prosper tennis rather than in a way that kind of makes the sport look worse.
Yeah. And I always get a kick out of people, well, probably on Twitter mostly. I don't know why I even waste my time, but how sure they are of their opinion. Like it's like you're so sure, like you said, this rule is this is set in stone and we should never question it. We should never look to evolve it. We should never look to eliminate it. And then yeah, people on the other side saying it's the worst thing in the world. It needs to be gone. Well, maybe there's some middle ground. Like you said, let's just have a conversation.
Right. Let's have a conversation. I feel like those conversations are never had, right? And I know, I mean, I've been uh, uh, development coach of the year multiple times, and I never get in the rooms on those conversations. So
Mm,
then, to me, I know those conversations probably aren't happening if I unless unless they just don't want to hear my opinion, which might be might be accurate. Also, I probably wouldn't blame them, but because it's going to be more outside the box, right?
right.
But you can take this from junior pathway to junior tournaments to college tennis to pro tennis to TV to the announcers, like just across the board. Start looking at like, okay, let's break this down and go, is this really what's best for the sport? And then can if it's not, or if it is, are there better ideas out there, right? I don't know if there's a group out there going that way. And if you look at the NBA, you look at the NFL, you look at soccer, you look at other sports, I just feel like they're evolving so much faster than tennis.
For
And they're,
sure.
you look at something like pickleball, they're just on a craze right now.
Hmm.
Picking up, you look at UFC, they just went on a craze, picking up so fast and going, okay, like what are we doing to evolutionize our game and change our game to this generation, to the next generations, to the sport itself, and just to where it's enjoyable and fun and moving in a good direction, rather than it's just, well, this is just always the way it's been.
Hmm. And so, Joey, I mean, have you seen changes then in the last 10 years in the pathway from junior tennis to college tennis? Have there been changes that you've noticed?
I mean, probably from the junior standpoint, the biggest change was probably UTR, right? Definitely such an interesting conversation with, having Cullen at that point where there was no UTR going into college to Jensen going into college where there was a UTR, because Jensen's UTR going into college said he was basically, the top college player already. And so
Hmm.
you couldn't judge where junior was going into college before. It was very difficult to say like, this is where he plays in the lineup, or this is what he is in the overall picture. Now, you can go on there and go, okay, what's the UTR of Stanford's top six, right? And you can get an idea of level and where you're at. I'm not saying UTR is like the end all be all kind of thing, but it gives an idea of level, right? And I think that was probably one of the biggest changes in junior tennis. It made the college coaching different, as far as recruiting.
Hmm.
I think it simplified it for that's good and bad. I feel like maybe coaches don't have to do their homework as much as they used to, which is not a good thing. But then at the same time, it gave them a better idea of, say, what the tennis recruiting, right? Say you have a blue chip who's one or two in freshman year and sophomore year, but the UTRs could be completely different. And so that now you know when there's a strong year and when there's a weaker year and these type of things. And so then you're able to judge this more on a larger scale. So I definitely feel like, and then UTR also helped kids that couldn't afford to travel around the world to get to these tournaments, to build up their ranking per se. You know, you can play locally, you can build your UTR that way, and then you could still get a good scholarship. I'm in California. I told some of my parents, I was like, listen, you don't really need to leave California until you're the best player in California.
Yeah.
This will save you, I don't know, a couple hundred thousands throughout this process. If you want to save that money, if you want to go around and seeing where your kid is ranked in the country. And it was funny. We had a kid that was, 8 years old, and I've watched enough tennis, right? And I'm like, they're probably one of the best 8-year-olds in the country. And the mom and dad's like, how do you know that? I was like, I just watched it enough. I've seen enough 8-year-olds come through my academy that I know. And they're like, well, we're gonna go play this national, this national, this national. I went and played it, came back, kid got second, and they're like, he's one of the best in the country. I was like, well, I could have saved you a lot of money, but if you need that confirmation, you need that trophy, you need that, sometimes they would say that builds the confidence to the kid, like, okay, like I get it, but you could have saved a lot of money there. And then they will complain about money. I'm sitting there going, well, there's a way to save here.
Right.
So even with my daughter's 9, I don't see myself flying around the country just to go see if she. I know what her level is, and I have a tough time driving very far, to go find out what her level is, because I know exactly what her level is. And so I think that UTR really changed, it's giving you the information so you don't have to do those things. So that's definitely one thing that from the junior pathway to the college pathway, I'd say in the last 5 to 7 years really changed the perspective of what people can do, how much money they can save, tournaments they can play, all that kind of stuff. It changed the landscape of junior tennis.
Yeah, well, now we have the ITF World Tennis number, which is doing that globally. That's what we're excited about. That
I think that's great too. I mean, getting a level-based play, it just makes sense, right? It just
and syncing up the tennis world, syncing up different levels.
Yeah, it just I would love to see them do, just to save people money, right? Like, God, it's such an expensive sport. Like, okay, ITF 25K is based off of a level you get in, rather based off points, right? Like, I mean, gosh, when you got to fly around the whole world to pick up these points, you're spending so much money, and that just deteriorates kids from trying to go pro and trying to chase a dream to an extent, because it's just so expensive. Where if I get a player to this level in Sacramento, and I know I can get into this tournament to play pro level because the level is good enough, that would just be, I think that would solve so much of America's problems too, because Europe has a huge advantage on that side. I mean, Spain and they got a future every 2 hours within a 2-hour drive, because Europe's so close together, and the travel is so much easier. Out of control. When I went to Europe, I was like, oh my God, this is so nice. Whereas in America, like, when you get to the 15Ks and the 25Ks, it's so difficult to get your player going at that level. You're asking for wild cards all the time to get them started. I got a player right now, 14, 15-year-old girl. She's ready to play the 25Ks, and how do I get that started level wise, UTR wise? She's good, to get in. And so if the ITF would, and that's one of those traditional things, right? Like can we change that for the greater good? I don't think anybody can argue that that's not better.
No, Yeah, and I think it's heading in that direction, Joey, just based in the conversations that I'm fortunate now to be in. I do think we're heading in that direction and actually going to sync up the global tennis ecosystem. Finally, it's still got some hurdles to get over. We've still got, different alphabets involved, but I do think this generation of tennis administrators are really trying to learn from mistakes of previous generations and work more closely together for the betterment of the sport, because we all need each other at the end of the day. So, but lastly, Joey, just one more question is, and obviously we have a very small percentage of our membership have players that go on to play professionally, but we do have a small percentage, and a lot of them listen to this podcast, and I think we'll be interested to hear what you have to say. And we have the recent announcement with the ATP Accelerator program, where the ATP are going to use our ITA rankings to facilitate that transition, provide wildcards into challengers so they can skip over the 15, 25Ks. And we hope to have something similar on the women's side here shortly. But what would you recommend to a college player or to a college coach who has a player that wants to play pro? What advice would you give to them making that transition?
Yeah, I mean, look, it goes back to setting up a system the correct way, right? And I think when it comes to that transition for college to pro or junior to pro, it's very important to have a good team around you, right? And don't just go out there by yourself. I mean, after being out there so many times, and I've gone through the futures, 15K, 20K, when you see the kids traveling by themselves, right, and the players traveling by themselves for long periods of time, it just never works. It's such a difficult road, right? Even if a parent's traveling with them, that's healthier. But when I watched, it was funny. Every group I went to, every level, right? When the team was there with a player, that player seemed to move levels the best, right? So don't, when you're in college and you go, okay, I'm gonna go pro, like you just start going to play tournaments. So better to sit there and go, okay, just like starting a business, how am I going to put these pieces together and how am I going to set this up? Where's my home base? Where are my coaches? How much are they traveling with me? What's my day to day? Like, have a strategical plan to go. Don't just, hey, I'm going to go pro. And I feel like if I watch the ones who, I remember seeing Sinner for the first time at a challenger. He was just, it was when Jensen was, him and Jensen first were at the same challenger, and it was in Aptos, and nobody heard of Sinner quite yet. And I was watching it, and it was just, he had a team, and it was very organized, and it was very disciplined, it was very focused, and same with Korda, same with Nakashima, same with Jensen, same with Alcaraz. When you're watching these guys, it's everybody, once they get to the top, are like, wow, they're amazing. And I'm like, I'm like, well, did you see him in the 25Ks, right? Did you see him in the juniors, right? When Jensen was 12, we were at a camp and I saw Brandon Nakashima. I was like, I pointed to Jensen. I was like, okay, that kid has it together. And it wasn't that I thought his forehand was amazing, his backhand was amazing, stuff. It was the organization. It was the focus. It was the setup. It was the team. It was very purposeful. They had a philosophy. They had everything. And I was like, all right, and anybody can. I said that's going to be your biggest competition. Fast forward in the 18s, they end up playing each other every 4 times in the 18s, whether it's Kalamazoo finals, whether it was Easter Bowl, whether it was Junior U.S. Open. They just kept up playing, and I was like, I was right, and I was right because not because I was looking at his forehand and backhand, but because I was looking at the system. So if you have a player and you're gonna go, okay, I'm gonna go pro, setting up, like, get him a coach that believes in him, get him a system, get him a home base, get him a daily routine, get him a coach that travels, get him those things, and that's where the financial aspect is just brutal, right? And that's, to me, that's where the ATP, the ITF, the governing bodies, whether it's the USTA or other countries, have to jump in and go, okay, this is our sport. How do we make this more feasible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or find it like to go pro in the NBA or basketball or soccer or anything. It's like the team is taken care of. It's there is no burden there, right? And so but that's in junior tennis, it's a little bit more reasonable. It's still very expensive, but if you're smart, you can do it. But even to start soccer compared to tennis or baseball, I mean, it's tennis is a little different because it's so individualistic, and I think they have to look at how to do that. So on one side, we've got to get better at building a team for some of these kids and looking at it. And that's what, I would tell a college coach is like, just don't, like, if you care about the kid and you want the kid to be successful, don't let him just, okay, I'm gonna start signing up for tournaments in Cancun and start going
Mm-hmm.
world. You're just, it's a cool experience, I guess, but you're just throwing away money as far as development, right? But if you want to do it right, and I've had a couple college coaches call me and be like, hey Joe, I want them to base out of your academy, and I want do you have a coach to travel with them, and then they're looking to set that kid up correctly to have success into that. And I think that's what they should be doing. And then also be honest, like, with the kid, if they're ready for that and if they're at the level.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I think this is the longest podcast I've ever done, but it was a blast. I learned a lot. I think our coaches will really enjoy listening to this and start applying some of the things, or at least thinking about some of those items you mentioned around your philosophy and how that might apply to their programs, their players, their recruiting philosophy, etc. So this was great, and let's do a round two at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to, Dave. I appreciate you having me, and always a pleasure, and always good seeing your face. And I'd love to run into you again sometime down the road in person. But really appreciate you having me, and for sure, would love to do another one.
Great. I'll look forward to it, Joey.
Coaches, just a quick reminder that our ITA College Tennis Coaches Convention will be held during the NCAA Combined Championships from May 17th to the 20th in Lake Nona, Florida. If you would like to learn more or register, please visit convention.itatennis.com. I hope to see many of you there.